My name's Harley Grouette. My place of origin, I always tell people, is St. Boniface, but it's actually the richer Ile-des-Chênes area of Manitoba. That's where my mom and dad were from. Although I grew up more in BC, Alberta when I was growing up. But I've come back here after I retired.
What's something you remember most from your Métis childhood and upbringing?
You know, I was thinking about that when I first got these questions. I was thinking about what was what I remember most about my upbringing, my childhood. What I remember most is my grandmother and my parents telling stories about our history. Now, they didn't go obviously too deep in the water because I didn't know that far back, but they talked about our traditional harvesting and our traditional, our Métis traditions, and they taught us. One of the things I believe about the Métis is that most Métis men can cook, and it's because that's part of our culture. All of my brothers and I were taught to cook. We were taught to cook by our grandparents. We were taught to cook by our parents. My dad cooked. My brothers cooked. We all cooked. And I think that's one of the traditions is from our hunting is that we have to be able to provide when we're away from our women. And so we all know how to cook. So that was one of the things that when you think about your history, your memories of youth, my memories of my youth, one of the strongest memories is me cooking with my grandmother. Tell you the truth, it's a funny remembrance, but that's one of the strongest memories I have. Tortillere, bannock, butter tarts, pancakes, and then all the wild meat that she would make. Yeah.
Awesome.
It was great. Melissa's stories I remember about my grandmother were told by my father about when he was growing up. They were growing up in St. Boniface, and they grew up fairly poor, and how they would hunt within Winnipeg. They would hunt rabbits and pigeons within Winnipeg because they subsidized their existence back in the 20s and 30s by hunting within St. Boniface, and that they would go out and hunt rabbits and hunt ducks and hunt geese, and then my grandmother would prepare them for them, and it would be my dad would tell the story about coming home with a brace of ducks, and my grandmother saying to him, like, "Where did you get those?" And my dad saying, "I found them." And my grandmother saying, "Okay, we'll cook your found ducks, but make sure you don't get caught finding them again." Because they used to go out and shoot ducks in St. Boniface. We knew that we were Métis when we were small, although it wasn't, as I've said, it wasn't a well-publicized part of our history. We weren't encouraged to tell people that we were Métis. We were encouraged to keep our Métis heritage to ourselves. When I was growing up, Métis were lumped in with Indigenous First Nations people. And so we weren't seen as a distinct people. And my parents encouraged us not to tell others in our community that we were Métis for fear of repercussions. Well, it was interesting because we still practiced all the Métis traditional things in our house. We were harvesters. We did all the traditional Métis things. We were strong. We were brought up in a strong Catholic family, so we were part of that group. And we hung out with all other Métis people that we knew, but it just wasn't public beyond our family circle, basically. So it was not anything our family didn't do. It was that we didn't broadcast that to the community for fear at that time. There was fear that you would be passed over for jobs, that you wouldn't be able to get into certain programs if they knew that you were Métis, because they were actively discriminating against any Indigenous, and they didn't distinguish between Indigenous and Métis. So there was fear of active discrimination. So yeah, we kept it to ourselves. My favorite Métis meal, I think, is elk. I like elk. I like moose, but I think my real favorite, to tell you the truth, is tortillere. Oh. That's a family tradition of ours. We always have it at special occasions. So tortillere is my favorite Métis meal. We used to put moose and pork. Oh. That was our mix for that. Lots of onions and And when it was made by my grandmother, it was the best. Well, I moved out to BC because my father was a soldier, and we lived on, he was an airborne soldier, so we lived on the airborne bases in Alberta and British Columbia. So that's how we ended up out there. I actually enjoy, I was living in the Lower Mainland, so I actually enjoy Manitoba because of the big sky and the sunny sky. I don't, the rain and the wet and the clouds don't. I hunt every year. I harvest. I've harvested all my life. That was one of the Métis traditions that my father taught me and my brothers, and we're all harvesters, and we always have been harvesters. And I got two elk and 2 deer last year, and it's a good tradition to teach our children and our grandchildren. Yeah, I hunt with my brothers, and I hunt with my sons, and I hunt with my grandsons. Oh yeah, they all hunted with me. They were all part of the work. I think that it's becoming a lost art. A lot of people aren't harvesters, although more the senior Métis are still harvesters. Mm-hmm. But my sons are harvesters, so it's funny because when I became old enough to understand what the impact the Métis community had, and I embraced that identification. I became the first in my family to join a Métis federation. I joined the Manitoba Métis Federation, and I went back to my parents, and I encouraged them to join because they actually hadn't joined any Métis federation, and they were quite elderly at that time. Mm-hmm. And all my children are members of the Federation. All my brothers and sisters are members of the Federation. And they carry it more proudly. We wear our Métis regalia to events. We wear our Métis identification on us, and we tell people who we are. Mm-hmm. And we explain that to them. I don't know how many times I've sat down with neighbors or something, and they go, "Oh, what's your background?" And we go, "Oh, we're Métis." And they go, "What's that?" And so we get a chance to tell them about our history and our place in Canada. We are part of the building of Canada, and people just don't seem to really understand the role that Louis Riel played in the building of Manitoba, especially. I think Métis should be very proud of the role they played in the establishment of Manitoba. To tell you the truth, if it weren't for the Métis, if it weren't for Louis Riel, we wouldn't have Manitoba as it is. I am a direct descendant of Alexander Greenfield MacDonnell, who was a partner in the Northwest Company, who took a Cree wife by the name of Suzette, and they formed the Red River Colony. They were one of the original founders of the Red River Colony. I only found that out when I went to the St. Boniface Historical Society and sat down with one of their researchers. Yeah. And he said, "Oh, you're related to this guy." And I go, "Okay. Who is that guy?" And then he told me the history of this partner in the Northwest Company that became very much involved in the establishment of the Red River Colony. So it was really cool to know that as part of my cultural background. It was really an exciting revelation to me because he was talking to me and he brings up my history and he calls another researcher and he says to this other researcher, he goes, "These people are direct descendants of Alexander Greenfield MacDonnell." And I go, "Who's he?" Yeah. And then he explained the lineage and what the background was. It was really quite interesting to see that as part of the Métis history and that our family was involved in it right from the get-go. Yeah. So it was really cool to see. Actually, there's several books out. I've got several books about Alexander Greenfield MacDonnell and his role in the establishment of the Red River Colony. Well, we hunted like everyone else. We hunted within the regulations. We always have, but it's a lot different when we still have some difficulty hunting because there's still a lot of prejudice against Métis harvesters. Mm-hmm. It's funny because my son and I will go out and we always, as we have to, we always meet with the people that own the land and ask permission to hunt. And they're very cordial usually when we're talking to them. "Hey, how you doing? We would like to harvest on your land if that's possible." And they'll go, "Yeah, well, the hunting season isn't on for another month." And we go, "Well, our hunting season's on now." And they'll say, "What do you mean your hunting season's on now?" And we'll say, "We're Métis harvesters." And as soon as you tell them you're a Métis harvester, this has happened time and time again with us, they cloud over. and they tell us, there's no way that you're ever going to hunt on my property. You can leave my property now.
Yeah.
And they just still have that prejudice that comes up to the top, and you can see it, and it's like, really, it's really quite, it's actually quite sad when you see that, because they don't understand who we are and what we stand for and how we harvest. That we don't harvest for trophy. We're harvesting for sustenance. We're harvesting for tradition, and it's a much different type of harvesting. When I grew up, I grew up with the firm understanding that you don't shoot anything you're not going to eat. That's how we were taught as children, as Métis hunters. You don't shoot things just for fun. You don't kill something for the sake of killing it. You kill something or harvest something because it's for your family. The other thing that people don't understand, and my neighbors don't understand this, when we take an animal, it's not my animal. It's my whole family's animal. It's my sons, my brothers. We share with our neighbors. It's not mine. Yeah. When I hunted with other folks, it became, when I was younger, if I was hunting with non-Métis, it was like, well, this better be split 50-50. And it's like, well, okay, but really if we harvest a 600-pound moose, you're not going to be able to eat 600 pounds of meat, neither am I, or 300 each. That's going to be a lot. And so I'm going to be distributing mine. And they would look at me like, why are you distributing it? I said, well, that's what you do when you harvest animals. You distribute it within your family. And that's a Métis tradition that a lot of non-Métis hunters don't understand, is we harvest for our family groups. We don't harvest just for me. Never have. I always have shared our harvest. So it's a different style of hunting. It's a different style of harvesting where you are not hunting for a trophy, something to peg on your wall. Excuse me. What you're hunting for is to provide food for your community. You know, I've thought about the biggest challenges that the Métis have, and I think the Métis would still be struggling personally if we didn't have a good, strong government. The Manitoba Métis Federation has had strong leadership, has had for a long time, and that's paid off in the long run. It was a struggle to begin with. I know my aunt, Dorame Gauthier, was in the Southwest region. She was part of the early MMF organization. They struggled. It was a hard push. But as they've gotten more support within the Métis people, and more support by winning the battles that they chose to fight, and winning the Supreme Court battles for recognition, that to me is some of the biggest challenges that they've overcome. And there's still challenges. There's still prejudice that they've got to work on. But they're doing it by systematically educating their own people as to what our history is, and as well as the other people within Canada as to who we are as a nation. For the Métis to break down those decades and decades, century of prejudice is not a fast event. It's a slow grind, and they are willing to put the effort and the time to put that out there, so people will slowly begin to understand who we are, that we are a distinct people, that we had a history in the making of Canada, and that we're a proud people that have traditions and a traditional part of how we react within our communities that needs to be recognized and should be recognized, and it will be recognized, and it is being recognized, but it's going to take time. It always takes time. Well, in the 1980s, we weren't identified as a people. We were part of the Indigenous community. We were seen as part of a First Nations group that was kind of off to the side. We weren't water, we weren't wine. We were somewhere in between, and nobody had any idea. So they lumped us in with the First Nations instead of saying these folks have a distinct history, a distinct culture that is separate from First Nations and separate from the white community. We are right in between. And so when we were growing up, that wasn't as well known. It wasn't spoken about at all. Wasn't spoken about. When they talk about our history, when I was growing up, all they would talk about was Louis Riel and how Louis Riel was a rebel and ended up fighting the government, causing a war, and losing his life for his effort. They didn't see him as the founder of Manitoba. They saw him as a criminal, that's changing. They're starting to see who he was and what he did for Canada and for the Métis people and for Manitoba, for the establishment of Manitoba. So when I was growing up, that wasn't known. When I was growing up, we didn't identify publicly. Now we do. Now we're educating our communities, we're educating our own people, and I think that's bringing us the strength to be seen as an independent nation. That allows us to move forward with a treaty with the government and with the government understanding that we are a distinct people.
What about school? Like, was that taught in school then, that he was a rebel and a traitor?
Oh, that's the only thing I remember about school. I've thought about that question. What do you remember about the Métis identity in school? And it was Louis Riel was a rebel, caused a war, was executed for his effort, and not that he had a colony that they formed, that they actually formed Manitoba in reality, and that they fought against the government because the government was not holding up to its end of any kind of agreement that they had, and they were trying to force the Métis off the land, basically. Yeah. And they did, actually, for years and years and years. Yeah. My daughter's a very well-known beater. She does beating, and my nieces are also beaters, and my granddaughters are beaters. So that's about the only tradition that our family continues on, is they continue on as traditional Métis beaters. Mm-hmm. But we're just hunters and gatherers still. Been canning suckers, and I've got some suckers that we've been canning, and to me I hope that our future generations continue to practice our cultural traditional activities, our harvesting, our gathering, our gatherings as a people, our gatherings as a community, that they continue to share within our community, because I think that's a part of the Métis community that is, what I want to say is that sharing of everything within our community, which happens a lot, is what makes our community tight-knit and stronger. That's just what it does. It connects you to your community, connects you to each other, you take care of each other, and that's a tradition I'd love to see continue. If it doesn't continue, we'll have lost something. Well, to me, the biggest difference for me, from my youth to now, is when I was a youth, we told no one that we're Métis. I didn't wear my sash out in public. I wore it at family gatherings. I didn't tell anyone that I was Métis, and now I tell everyone I'm Métis. I wear Métis regalia. I wear my beating that my daughter and granddaughters do for me. Proudly, I make sure people understand who I am and what I stand for, what our values are, and how we behave. And I think that's a huge difference for me, to make sure that people know who I am and what I stand for. Yeah. And we can do that, and which I believe we can do that in public in Manitoba, because we've had the leadership in the Manitoba Métis Federation that's allowed us to do that. We have a lot to be thankful for, with the fact that we've got people that have dedicated their whole lives to that focus of bringing the Métis people the recognition that we deserve and we lost many years ago, and they've got it back for us. They should be very proud. I've got 4 children, and my children aren't children. My children are all grown up now. They're all out on their own. I've got 2 sons in Calgary. One's in the oil industry. He's a pipe fitter, gas fitter. My other son has a master's degree in business. He runs a company out of Calgary that operates in Alberta and Saskatchewan. I've got a daughter that lives with her husband down in the States, down in Georgia. and my other daughter lives just in Grandview, just by me. My daughter, that's the traditional Métis beater, lives in Manitoba.
Oh,
So, and they're all, my eldest is 44, and my youngest is 34. I have 7 grandchildren. I have 4 boys and 3 girls, and they're quite a crew. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
they keep grandpa.
We take them out hunting. You know, I've got to tell you the story. So my eldest grandson from Alberta came out hunting with me the first time, and he wanted to know how you hunt deer. And I said, you have to be very quiet, and you sit quietly, and you say very quietly, here, deer, 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 deer. Here, deer, 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 deer. I didn't have the heart to tell him after 3 hours that wasn't how you caught deer. but I'm a terrible grandfather. It's something that I'm going to tell him when he's 20.
Yeah.
But we take our grandchildren out hunting with us. They're part of the preparation of the results of our hunt, like of our harvest. They help with that, and they very much practice they practice their being publicly identified as Métis, which I'm proud of. Oh yeah, and they take part in Métis programs that they have for young children and that, so that they can learn about their identity and they can learn about their traditions. I think the MMF is making opportunities for our youth. They are, by forming a government, they're getting involved in education, early childhood education, health, all those aspects of running a government that give opportunity. They support education incredibly well. And if I could think that anything that's going to impact the MMF going forward is our focus on education, is our focus on getting our children on a really solid educational basis so that they can compete on a level playing field with the rest of the community. That's been lacking in a lot of our communities. It's coming, and it's coming because of our government's focus on that. And we're going to see great results with that because of those educational opportunities for our Métis citizens. I think also that the opportunities that are developed from our Métis citizens by being supported in their entrepreneurial style. I think Métis have always been entrepreneurial. They've always been the ones that go out and do the trade and do the business. I think that support from the Métis government to get involved in that is also paying dividends. We're seeing a lot of Métis businesses that are flourishing, and I'd like to see more. I'd like to be able to see like a decal or something on a Métis business that you could identify it and we go, oh, that's one of ours.
Yeah.
We're going to support that because we know it's one of ours. Something like that makes us proud to support those members of our community that are being entrepreneurs. Mm-hmm. In the Métis history, if you see one leader or a group of individuals, that Métis individuals say, we're going to make a change. We're going to make things happen, and then go out and grind and give their effort, give their life's effort to that, and then see the results they get from that dedication. That's what we're harvesting right now. That's what we're seeing right now as Métis citizens in Manitoba. We're seeing the hard work, the generational work of our leadership, and I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the fact that they had the strength and the will to do that, and what it means to our children and our grandchildren. It's phenomenal. It's something we should be very proud of as a nation. When you see a Métis gathering, a lot of times you see a lot of white-haired people like me. You don't see a lot of youth in there, and that's got to change. We have to be able to pass this torch on to our following generations, and we want there are leaders out there. There are Métis leaders out there right now that are in their early 20s and 30s that are just getting their feet under them, and there are leaders amongst them. And we need to encourage them to become involved in our local leadership and in our government so that they can participate in the future for us. But there are leaders out there. How do we get them? That's always, how do we pull them away from the electronic world they live in nowadays? You know, to go out and hunt, to go out and harvest, to go out and do something as mundane as beading or painting, compared to the, we don't have a live action Métis game yet. How do we engage our youth to see the future of the MMF nation or the Métis nation? How do we engage them to see the Métis nation as being something that only will survive if they get involved in it? If they take, what I've always told my children is that nothing worthwhile that you do in life is easy. Nothing. Going to school is not easy, yet it's worthwhile. Taking part in relationships with your friends a lot of times is not easy, but it's worthwhile. So how do we explain to our youth that for them to have a worthwhile Métis nation, they have to put the effort in? This generation is going to die out. And when we are gone, who is going to pick up the torch and run that hard race? We want the leaders that are amongst our youth now to stand up and start getting involved in that race. And that'll come, but I think we need to really encourage that. We need to encourage our young people to see that they are the future. And if they want the future to be prosperous for them and to be meaningful as a nation and to be able to proudly self-identify as Métis, we need them to pick up that torch and continue the race. It's not a struggle, it's a grind. You have to continue to say, you know what, I'm not looking for the big win. I'm not looking for the big parade down Main Street. What I'm looking for is that incremental change in our community, that incremental change with our relationship with other governments, that incremental change in the education level of our children. That's hard work, it's slow work, but when you step back after 5-6 years and you go, man, have we ever come a long way in this 5 years? But at the time when you're in that struggle or in that grind, it's hard to see that the motion forward you're making. But it's happening all the time. And I want that forward motion to continue with our youth. And I want to encourage them to take part in that, to see that as their God-given right to be involved in that, and that they are the future of the Métis nation. If I could say anything to the Métis youth about the future is, I would like them to know that they should be proud to be Métis, that they should continue with their education push, because that will help them to have a level playing field when they're dealing with other agencies and other organizations, and that the future for our Métis youth is bright. I think it's got a huge upside to it with this new treaty coming up, with all the different initiatives that our Métis government is working on, that they have everything to be proud of, and they have nothing but a great future to look forward to.